Welcome to another edition of the Radio Coffee House Show, where Jesus meets coffee meets talk radio. And the next one starts right now. Hey, how's it going, guys? It's Clint Armitage with the Radio Coffee House Show. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening in. If you're listening to us on podcast platforms, then all you have to do is search Radio Coffee House, all separate words, and you'll find us. Make sure to like us, follow us, and also click the notification button so that you can hear what's going on with our show, because we got some interesting things going to be happening in a few weeks. We're going to be introducing a new series that's going to be intriguing because it's an investigative series. Okay, so today's episode, we are bringing back Debbie Hudgens. If you remember, she came a few weeks ago and she spoke about Christian activism, how to become an active Christian. Well, today she's coming in and she's actually talking about her life. And the reason why she's talking about her life is because it is super intriguing. It's actually really heavy. Her life involves abuse, and we're talking mental, emotional, physical. Her life also involves suicide and alcoholism and schizophrenia. There is so many things going on, but there has been one consistent, and that's God. So let's hear her story because she's got a lot to say. Okay, so as stated earlier, we have Debbie Hudgens back in, and she did a previous show. Now, we're actually having Debbie back in here to talk about her life because actually she has a very powerful story, and I am really interested to not only hear about the story, but also how was God involved in doing some big things in her life. Like I said, powerful story. So I'm going to, just kind of ask her some questions, and she's going to tell us all about her life and how God kind of got involved, and we're just going to do that, and it's going to be pretty incredible, I am sure. So Debbie, thanks for coming back in the studio. Really appreciate you coming down and talking to us about your life today.
Thanks, Clint. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, so let's start off like this. Tell us about yourself first, and kind of go back and then get into the story that you're going to be talking about today, because it's kind of a heavy topic, and our listeners are going to find out real quick that it is a heavy topic. But why don't you start from the beginning and tell us where you grew up and all that stuff. Go way back.
Thanks, Clint. Was born in Germany. My dad was in the service. He married a very young woman, rescuing her from a difficult family situation. He was 6 years older. She was 14 when she had me, and we lived in Germany for 2 years. We had a pretty perfect life. My dad was already, had moved up in the ranks and was advancing well in the Army and provided a very comfortable life for us. My mother, being so young, had a nanny that would help her because she had no idea other than baby dolls how to take care of a baby.
Wow, that's incredible, because you don't hear that type of story too much anymore. So that's incredible. I'm sorry to interject or interrupt you, but 14-year-old getting married to your father. How old was your father again?
He was 20 when I was born.
Okay.
So they'd been married a year.
Right.
But yeah, that would not be acceptable today.
But then back then, that's, like I said, but so you don't hear that as much nowadays. So that's interesting. And so this was in Germany then?
Well, they got married in the States, and then he got shipped to Germany. So he wanted to bring her over, and she was already pregnant at the time. So he, wanted to be with her there. She was from a family of 13. She was kind of in the middle of the 13 kids. And she had business parents that ran a business, and they were constantly away taking care of the business and leaving the 13 kids to kind of look after themselves, and there was a lot of mischief going on that shouldn't have been happening. So when my dad saw he ran into her somewhere and found out what was going on at the house and there was no supervision, he just wanted to take her out of that situation. And when she got married, she called her mother and said, "I just got married." And her mother said, "Oh, great. Tell me where to bring some linens and household stuff for you." So it's no big deal.
It's not.
So she was excited, of course, to get to travel. My mother and she's still living. She's extremely intelligent. I would say close to genius IQ. So although she didn't get to finish school, she pretty much self-educated herself. And eventually she did finish school, but she read a lot. And because she loved to read, she read to me. she started reading to me as soon as I was born. And by age 4, I could read myself. So she taught me a lot. She loved Christ and always taught me Christian values from day one. I never had any doubt, that she loved God, and learned to sing hymns. And we were very involved in church. My granddad was a deacon of a church. He had donated the property and built a church and was a deacon. And then his oldest son was a preacher. So we would just walk up the hill and go to church after we moved back to the United States. And my dad didn't stay in the service very long after that. We did move around a little bit. We lived in Texas and in Florida a little bit, but then ended up on the farm with my granddad and grandma.
So how big was this farm and where was it?
It was in Ringgold, Georgia, and it was 300 acres of beautiful property, just rolling hills. Northern Georgia is very beautiful. So this is right on the Tennessee-Georgia border, so kind of right at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it was a wonderful place to grow up.
I would assume so. 300 acres. You don't hear that much nowadays because 300 acres is a lot of money nowadays. So
yeah, it was big property and you could get lost. So we didn't wander very far from home, and we were kept on a tight rein because my dad didn't want us, running out and getting lost. And there were animals that were a little bit suspicious sometimes, cows that didn't like kids and that kind of thing. So we had to, be pretty good. But we helped grandmother in the garden and gathering eggs and whatever needed to be done. We were always had our hands in it. My first sister wasn't born until I was 4. And so I had my parents kind of to myself those first 4 years, which are the formative years. And I think that really programmed me in a lot of ways for who I am today. One, learning to read so early and being involved in church. We were Southern Baptists, and I loved church. I just loved it. Wanted to be there all the time. So after my sister was born, some dynamics changed a little bit. My mother's next sister to her, the next youngest, had a child within 4 months of my sister being born. And she was very despondent. It was, the child was because of a rape. So she was extremely distraught a lot. And we moved into a little house on the property, and we didn't have an indoor bathroom, so we had an outhouse and all that. The big house had everything, but we didn't. We were building a house farther out on the property, and that took some time, so we had to live in this little temporary place. Well, my mother would go up to the big house where her sister was with the child and get the child and bring her down. Because she was so close to the age of my sister, she'd let them play together. They were learning to crawl and doing this. And I had adopted one of the baby goats, and the baby goat would come and romp around and play with the kids. So that was all fun. But one day when my cousin was there with my sister, I think they were both about 9 months old, we saw my aunt, my mom's sister, walk by. There was another house down the hill, and there was a couple of barns. And we didn't see her for a while. And then one of the guys that worked on the farm came running to my mother screaming. She had committed suicide in the barn. Yeah, so it really changed our lives. My mother could not recover from that devastating news. And there's all kinds of things that come to mind when you lose somebody from suicide, guilt and all the other stuff. What could I have done to prevent that? It changed my mom and dad's relationship. My cousin that was there just automatically became my sister because she was there and she never left. She didn't even know until she got ready to start school that she wasn't born to us. Nobody told her.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was kind of sad and good at the same time, but because it was such a close community, my mother was afraid somebody was going to say something because they all knew and then wanted to tell her then, and that was kind of a big blow. But I think because of my mother's frame of mind, maybe, I don't know, my dad had developed a drinking habit when he was in the service, and that became increasingly more and more a problem, going out with his friends or his brothers or whoever to go drink and not come home, spending all the money on alcohol and that kind of thing. And my mother was getting more and more unhappy about things. And then with her sister, she started developing a mental illness and began hallucinating and developed full-blown schizophrenia. So I had an alcoholic father and a schizophrenic mother. She was institutionalized over and over again, which meant that we would kind of be shuffled around. We weren't old enough to take care of ourselves, so we had to kind of go with family or aunts, uncles, or whatever to be watched over. Then my dad became very angry. I think he was angry that he had all this responsibility and he was still drinking, but he would lash out in anger and in the name of discipline would be abusive physically. And I thank God that it was never sexually abusive. I didn't have to deal with anything like that, but that physical abuse and just constantly feeling like I wasn't good enough never measured up, because I would get punished for things I didn't even know what I did, or even something one of the other kids did.
How old were you when this all started?
I think I was about 8. Yeah, when that started. Yeah, so I was in school, and I'd have to go to school with marks on myself, and people would ask me, oh, what happened to your legs? Or, oh, what happened? Then I would make up a story, whatever, fell off my bike or whatever. I didn't even have a bike, but I'd say something really dumb. So that just continued until my mom had another sister, which I thought had just dropped straight out of heaven. I didn't know how we ever were so blessed to have this beautiful baby come into our lives. And I was like, I just can't believe he's going to let us keep her because she's just so wonderful. I just thought she just was an angel sent down.
I'm sorry, was that your sister or your mom's sister?
She's my sister.
Your sister. Okay, so your mom had another baby. I was 11 when she was born. And so I became sort of like a little mom to my little sister. So I had the other sister and the adopted sister and then this sister. And my dad was still very abusive. And there was a time when we had moved back into the big house for some reason. I can't remember the details, but I think our house still wasn't finished. My grandparents moved away to another city, and we moved there to just tend the farm. Some of it had been sold off, and we managed what was left. And I was beaten so bad that I couldn't go to school. Yeah, all I could do was lay on my stomach because I was beaten and I couldn't sit. After a couple of days, I was able to go with a pillow, and I could only go to school with a pillow. But I don't know what the teachers thought, if they thought anything or if they questioned it. But in those days, they just didn't say anything. It was, parents were allowed to whip their kids, And what I'll say now is that I accepted Christ at a very young age. I think it was about 9 when I really realized that I want to be like these people that are in this church. I want to be like Jesus. But I didn't really understand that relationship, that fatherly relationship. To me, it was all rules and punishment. So that was God to me. And I tell a story sometimes about when we were living in the little house. It snowed. We had like 6 inches of snow, and I was thrilled because it wasn't an usual occurrence. I wanted to go out and play in the snow, and my mother had a snowsuit, and she said, well, sure, you can go out and play. You got to put this snowsuit on. Well, in the Baptist church, you could not wear pants. It was a sin to wear pants. And I screamed and cried because I was not going to put pants on. I was going to go in the snow in a dress. And so I didn't get to go outside and play. Rules and regulations.
Yeah,
right?
It was the rules. You couldn't wear pants to school. You certainly couldn't wear them to church. When we went to church, we dressed up every Sunday, and we had Wednesday evening, Sunday night service. So God stayed that authority figure for me for many, many years. I didn't know how to have that close relationship with him. I loved Jesus. I knew he died for me, but it was more of a fear-based respect. And I ran away from home when I was 16 years old.
So from 11 years old to 16 years old, you were getting beat by your father. Was this, how regular was this?
I think it It stopped a good bit when I was about 14, but he was so restrictive. I couldn't talk on the telephone. I couldn't watch television. I never spent the night with a friend, ever. I couldn't go to a football game or do any outside activities. I was like a prisoner in the house, and I was scared to death of my dad. I don't recall. Sometimes it seems like I have wiped some things out of my memory, but I don't recall him beating me after about age 14. But I was still scared to death of him. But I was really a perfect kid. I really didn't do anything bad. I didn't cuss, I didn't smoke, I didn't, sneak out of the house, nothing. Until one day, I decided I could run my life a whole lot better than they could. And that was at 16, and I left. Yeah.
So, 16 years old. Now, you said you feared your father, and then you were getting beaten from about 8 to 14 years old, around there. Then those 2 years. So, was this a gradual thing that you started to think about them not running, you running your own life? Or did you just kind of just make a decision out of the blue when you were 16 years old? Or was it a process?
I was more and more frustrated about not ever seeing any hope for my future and thinking that there was no way they were going to let me drive. I was 16. I should have been able to get a driver's license. That wasn't going to happen. I couldn't see. I was very smart in school. I studied hard and I loved school, straight A student, and I wanted to be a doctor. And my dad brought home a brochure one day from a college, and it was a women's college, and now I guess it's co-ed, but he gave me the brochure and I just looked at it and I was like, yeah, right. At that time, there were 5 kids. My brother had been born. So I just thought, this is a pipe dream. We don't even have enough money to buy the kids clothes and underwear and all the other stuff we need. There's no college in my future. Now I know there were probably some avenues I could have looked into and taken, but there were no counselors at school or anybody that wanted to kind of guide me in that.
So you're 16 years old now, and you're made a decision that you're going to run away. Is that right?
Yeah. I had met somebody at school that I thought I was in love with, and I just wanted to get away, and he was going to offer that avenue for me to get away. He came from kind of a solid family, they had a family of 6, and his mom and dad both worked. They had a big nice house. They lived really close to where we were living at that time, and I said, I want to run away from my family. I don't want to stay here anymore. And we made a plan, and we even decided how we were going to get married, because I was 16. You weren't supposed to be able to get married at 16 without your parents. And there was no reason that we had to get married. None. Because remember, I had a very authoritative father, and I was following the rules. So I didn't break any of those rules, but really wanted to escape. So I did. I had a birth certificate from Germany that was made on this really soft paper. It erased very easily. And so I erased it and typed in a date that made me 18, I think, and put my hair up in a bun and put some glasses on and thought, I looked the part. They never questioned it. They gave us a marriage license and we got married, when I ran away. So, and then his mother just welcomed me right into the house and was like, because her son was a little bit, he was kind of a bad boy, and she thought, this is going to settle him down, he's got to now be responsible, and he was 2 years older than I was. So it did not work out like I thought it would. He became every bit as mean and abusive as my dad ever was. And the only thing I could think of was, if I were the perfect wife that he wanted, this wouldn't happen to me. There's no way he would hit me if I was doing everything right. So all I did, I'd get books and start reading books. How to be a better housekeeper, how to, be better in bed, whatever it was. I was just like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to be the perfect wife, and he is not going to hit me because I'm just going to be everything he ever wanted. And that didn't happen. There was nothing I could do. I was married 1 year, had a son. 2 years later, had another son. We had built a house. His dad had helped us, and we put it on the property next to theirs. I mean, basically we were doing pretty good, but the abuse just didn't stop. And then he started drinking, and the abuse just got worse. And then, cheating started happening because you go out drinking, and a lot of times you get pulled into other things. And so I was really just feeling pretty bad about myself, just not feeling worthy. My kids were 2 and 4. On Easter morning, we were getting ready to go to church and meet my mom and dad. And my adopted sister, my cousin, was at my house with her husband and her little girl. And we were all going to go together and meet my mom there. Well, I made breakfast, a big breakfast. I always made biscuits, bacon, eggs, coffee, everything, every morning. Breakfast was on the table. It sat there for an hour, and I could not get my husband to get up and come to the table, eat. I was trying to get the boys ready, get them dressed, put their little Easter outfits on, and he came to the table finally, and I said, "You're going to make us be late." And I said, "Everything's been sitting here for an hour." And he just goes, pow, backhands me across the mouth, and I'm sitting there. My lips are stinging and burning, and I was so angry. My hand was on my coffee cup. The next thing I know, I dashed the coffee in his face. I set the cup down, got up from the table, and started walking towards the bedroom, and I felt something hit me in the back that was like a cannonball. He had thrown a Coke bottle, because then it was the glass Coke bottles, the big green ones. He threw a Coke bottle and hit me in the back, and my knees buckled immediately, went to the floor, and I tried to get up. As soon as I stood up, I fainted, and then my sister was still there, so she was trying to help me. Well, she did help me get to the bed, but every time I tried to get up off the bed, I would faint. I'd just pass out. And at one time, I was able to stand up, and I knew I had to talk fast because I was going to hit the floor. So I said, "Tell Mom I'm okay," and because my sister was leaving. And then she knew I wasn't okay. So she goes to church and tells my mother, "You need to go check on Debbie. Something's wrong." So next thing I know, my mom she had knocked on the front door and nobody answered, and then she goes to the back. It was open. She came in the back door. Just as she was coming in the door, my husband was handing me 2 aspirin, and my mother said, "Don't take those." She said, "I'm getting you to the emergency room." I got to the emergency room. They tried to get blood. They did all kinds of tests. They did x-rays. And this was in 1975. And they didn't find anything. Even though they couldn't get a vein, the only place they could get was the femoral artery. They couldn't, and I had these huge dark things coming up under my eyes. And they said, "Well, we think she's just upset about the dispute with her husband, and we're just going to release her and let her go." So they put me in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk because every time I stood up, I fainted. And they put me in a wheelchair. Then my mom and my husband were arguing about where I was going to go. My mom said, "She's going to my house." And he said, "No, she's going home." And so they were standing there arguing. Meanwhile, I pass out in the wheelchair. And the doctor comes up and says, "No, she's staying here." So they put me in a room, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, my stomach distended, and they came in and said, "Your stomach always that big?" And I was really small at that time, and I said, "No." And they put a needle in, and blood shot up, so they knew there was internal bleeding, and did emergency surgery and took out my spleen that was busted in like 2 places. So that was very traumatic, of course. After that, went home with my mom and dad, lived with them for almost a year, ended up getting an apartment by myself. I had a car and driver's license, and I had these 2 little boys. And I thought, I can't date. What am I going to do with my life? And I was really young, still in my 20s, and I thought, how am I going to raise these kids by myself? My sister lived nearby. She was helping me. I had no real skills about, I loved my kids. I was a good parent, but I don't think I had a lot of wisdom still. But their dad started coming around. Of course, he wanted to see the kids, and then somehow we ended up getting back together. He promised me he would go to counseling. He would do whatever he needed to do to make the marriage work. That lasted 2 months. And everybody was telling me not to go back with him. And I was so embarrassed that I fell back into that trap, with an abusive man that almost killed me. And it was happening again. I didn't want anybody to know that he was hitting me and beating me again. So I tried my best to hide it. the Easter incident was at 5 years of marriage. I was married to him 12 more years after that.
Wow.
And it was pretty much daily abuse of just hitting, and I would have black eyes. And
So while you were in this relationship, this abusive relationship, and it was happening daily, now you mentioned something, and I want to kind of touch on that and see if you can break it down a little bit. You said that you were embarrassed that it was happening again. So is that embarrassment the reason why you stayed in the relationship? And was that the major factor or the major reason? Or was there other things? Okay, we ran out of time, so we won't be able to hear Debbie's answer on this episode. This is part 1 of a 2-part series called Abuse and Love, Debbie's Story. So now you're going to have to come back to listen to the rest of the story by joining us next time. And again, my name is Clint Armitage, and this is the Radio Coffee House, and I'd like to thank you for coming back and listening in. And until next time, stay safe and God bless you. Take care now. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Radio Coffee House Show, where we're all about Jesus, coffee, and radio. We'll see you next time.